Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. What do we mean when we say the word addiction? What is the definition for that word? And is it something that we should consider using a different term for altogether? That's what I want to talk about today in reading from This Naked Mind by Annie Grace. The word addiction is used all sorts of ways these days. A lot of times people use it just to mean that they really, really like something. You'll hear people talk about being addicted to a particular TV show or addicted to a type of soda or chocolate. And while there can be addictive behaviors associated with almost anything, it's very clear, it's very important that we define what addictive behavior looks like. In fact, a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists and professionals prefer not to even use the term addiction because it's been co-opted by society to and applied to behaviors and situations that really undermine the complexity of what it was meant to be in the first place. So I'm going to read a little bit from Annie's book, This Naked Mind, and talk about what really is involved in addiction. She writes, the term addiction is tossed around all the time. We can be addicted to chocolate, shopping, television, or really anything. The word has so many different meanings that psychiatrists prefer the term substance use disorder. Substance use disorders are classified based on certain characteristic features that fall into three categories: abuse, dependence, and craving. Abuse is characterized by significant negative consequences to the addicted. These can be health consequences, relational consequences, and consequences from no longer doing what you should be doing, like going to work in the morning. Dependence happens when the addict depends on the drug psychologically and sometimes physically. Important note, you can also substitute behavior in there for drug. So you could say dependence happens when the addict depends on the drug or behavior psychologically and sometimes physically. And the reason why that's important is that addictions based on behaviors, which are often referred to as process addictions, are gaining a lot more visibility, and it's very clear that they share a lot of similar traits to what would be considered more traditional addictions to drugs and alcohol. Dependence is characterized by tolerance when you need to consume more of the drug to get the same effect, and withdrawal when you have unpleasant psychological or physical symptoms when you stop taking the drug. Both occur when your body and brain have changed to compensate for the chronic presence of the drug. Craving is an extremely strong, illogical desire to use the drug. Cravings can contradict your feelings, meaning you may consciously desire to take the day off from drinking, but an intense craving for alcohol still exists. When an addict attempts to abstain, cravings can be so strong that the addict finds it hard to think about anything else. So I want to walk through these one by one to talk about what they look like, because I do think it's very important that we recognize that addiction is an extremely serious situation, and we use, and I'm guilty of this, we use that word too lightly when referring to behaviors that we just really enjoy engaging in. And so when we talk about addiction, it's important for us, especially as people in recovery, to know exactly what we're talking about. So abuse, again, she says, abuse is characterized by significant negative consequences to the addicted. So I experienced a wide range of negative consequences as a result of my abuse of drugs and alcohol. With alcohol, it was a constant feeling of just being sick and having low energy and the health consequences would show up in just my physical appearance. I remember there was one particular situation where I had a picture taken at work. I was in a picture, and I looked at that picture afterwards, and it was a day that I was very hungover. And I looked at that picture afterwards and could barely recognize myself. My physical appearance looked like that of someone who was extremely ill. I never got to the point where I had liver-related problems as a result of my heavy drinking, and I had it checked multiple times during my drinking because consciously I knew I was drinking enough to cause myself those kinds of problems. I never did have those problems. But I was told by my doctor that if I didn't quit drinking, I would develop diabetes. And so I definitely encountered that, as well as high cholesterol related to my drinking. And even then, I did not have any, I wanted to quit drinking, but I couldn't stop. Certainly, my abuse impacted my work and my relationships with other people, often at the same time. I had a hard time getting along with certain people at work because, in part, I was very inebriated a lot of the time and couldn't think clearly. And looking back, there's a lot of situations where if I had had a clear mind, I might have done something different that would have allowed me a more collegial relationship with some of my colleagues. So abuse affected all aspects of my life, not to mention interpersonal relationships with my wife, my friends, and then dependence. Dependence happens when the addict depends on the drug psychologically and sometimes physically. So I am, again, fortunate that I did not have that many periods of physical dependence. I did have some situations where I got the shakes in the morning, and it was a little odd because it only happened for a short period of time in my alcohol use. And then it went away, and that was even before my heaviest use of alcohol. But I did have the withdrawal, the unpleasant psychological or physical symptoms when I stopped taking the drug. In the beginning, my hangovers were almost non-existent. In fact, my friends in college were astounded that I could drink the level I drank and then not be hungover in the morning when they were all feeling miserable. Now, when that happened to them, they would take a few days off of drinking. But because I didn't feel terrible, I would just keep going. So for them, hangover was a good thing. It was the body's reminder to take a break. For me, I didn't have that. And by the time hangovers did start showing up, I was already dependent on the drug, and I had to push through them. And I pushed through them by taking more of the drugs. Because a hangover really is a withdrawal symptom of not having alcohol in your system. And so when I got into my late stage drinking, I was doing a lot of treating hangovers by drinking more, which doesn't fix the hangover, it just delays it. And when it comes on, it's even worse than it would have been, because what you really need to do to treat withdrawal symptoms is to get through them without continuing to administer the drug. So I certainly experienced those symptoms. And then the last one is the craving. The craving is an extremely strong illogical desire to use the drug. Cravings can contradict your feelings. Meaning you may consciously desire to take the day off of drinking, but an intense craving for alcohol still exists. And this was perhaps the most disturbing and frustrating aspect of my addiction, is that I would have periods of time where I desperately wanted to not drink. Desperately wanted to not drink. I wanted to take a day off. I wanted to be sober. I didn't want to skip work so I could stay home and drink. But there was such an intense craving, an illogical craving, that I found it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to do that. Now, when you describe that phenomenon to people who have never experienced it, they have a very hard time understanding it, and that's okay. That's okay. In fact, I would say that if you don't understand that, there is a good possibility that you're one of the people who probably will never have an issue with substance use disorders. You probably don't have whatever it takes to have a substance use disorder. If you do understand that feeling, then you probably have a substance use disorder or have experience with one, because that craving was the most intense part of my addiction and the part that created the most conflict within myself. Was the battle between knowing that I did not want to drink. I did not want to drink, but the craving to do so. And the craving always won. The craving always won. There was never a time that I can remember that I held out. There was one day in like 15 years, or 2 days in 15 years, where I was able to abstain. And otherwise, it was very, very difficult, if not impossible, for me to overcome that craving. So again, if you are feeling that way, it's a good sign that there's something on the level of addiction and substance abuse disorder going on. If you can't understand that feeling, try to at least be sympathetic and compassionate towards those who do have it, and count yourself lucky that you aren't wired in a way that that's your experience. That's it for today. Tomorrow she's going to discuss the cycle of addiction, which is super important, so we'll get into more then. Otherwise, have a great day.